It's no secret that Windwalker Monk has been in quite a slump when it comes to DPS, especially in comparison to other classes at the moment. Jesus Christ. Well, our cries have been heard, and Blizzard have finally seen the error of their ways, and Windwalker is getting a huge buff this week that is going to change up our talent choices, predominantly for AoE, as well as give us a nice damage boost, which will bring us back in line with other classes. So without further ado, let's go through the changes. We'll start with the biggie, Flurry of Zuin. Flurry of Zuin is getting a damage increase of a whopping 40%. Now, for those of you who don't know, this talent works passively and causes your attacks to have a chance to deal a large amount of damage to up to 5 enemies in front of you. Not only that, but it shares a talent with the notorious hit combo. Hit combos like Marmite. You either love it or hate it. Hit combo's been a staple for Windwalker for a few years now, and it's basically a roided up version of our mastery where you get rewarded with extra damage when you don't break it. The downside of this is when you do break mastery, you're severely punished and it feels extremely bad. Everyone here knows exactly how it feels to break hit combos. It's like a slap in the face. So, with this buff, Flurry of Zuin is extremely viable for AoE situations. Both talents are about on par with each other, but Flurry of Zuin is a much safer option, especially if you find yourself occasionally breaking mastery here and there. Because of this buff, I'd advise you take Flurry of Zuin over hit combos for Mythic Plus and for AoE encounters in the raid, as your damage will still be great, but you've now removed the risk and hefty punishment of breaking mastery. Right. Now let's take a gander at the Conduit of the Celestial changes. Overall, these changes are great for Conduit enjoyers. These changes alone won't change how Conduit plays at all. Rather, they'll just be a nice increase in damage output, which is nothing to complain about. So, what's the downside? Well, regardless of these changes, Conduit is still not on the same level as Shadowpan. In Mythic Plus, these gains are still not nearly enough to make up the gap. However, in Raid, things might be a little different. Because of Conduit's extremely high burst damage, if you're in an encounter that is roughly 4 minutes or under, this hero talent is actually going to be highly competitive with Shadowpan. It isn't going to be your go-to in high-end mythic bosses just yet. However, for heroic reclears or early mythic fights, this hero talent is actually going to hold its own. So if you really enjoy running Conduit, then you're definitely winning this patch. Finally, let's take a look at the real meat and potatoes of these buffs. These are the buffs that are going to actually change up our talents and affect our gameplay. Now, you don't need to worry too much about the Fists of Fury buff. That isn't going to affect anything really, it's just a nice bit of icing on this buff cake. It's all the changes to Blackout Kick and the talents related to Blackout Kick that we want to be looking at. These buffs to Blackout Kick talents are going to make them must-takes in your talent tree, which is going to spice up your playstyle and put more emphasis on Blackout Kick as an ability you're going to want to be pressing. It's worth mentioning now that there's going to be a lot less leeway on overcapping Teaching of the Monastery stacks. You're really going to want to be using Blackout Kick if you've reached max stacks to avoid overcapping, as this will be a more significant damage loss comparatively to what we have been used to. This is what our AoE talents looked like previously, and this is what they're potentially going to look like with the new patch. There's been a complete shift in our AoE talents, and quite frankly, the playstyle of Windwalker, with a big emphasis on Blackout Kick. Let's start off with the biggies then. Courageous Impulse, Shadowboxing Treads, and Sequence Strikes. Courageous Impulse was, until now, only used as a single target talent in niche situations. However, it's now a staple in your AoE setup. This talent makes it so that when you get a free Blackout Kick proc, it'll do 200% increased damage. This goes hand in hand with our other new staple talent, Shadowboxing Treads, which makes your Blackout Kick strike 2 additional targets. Finally, our last staple talent is Sequence Strikes. This makes it so that when we cast Whirling Dragon Punch, we get a proc of our free Blackout Kick. It's similar to how we get a free Spinning Crane Kick buff after we Whirling Dragon Punch. You can see that these new staples all work together and have in some ways enhancements to Blackout Kick, which has been the recipient of our big buff this patch. However, these are not the only changes to our talents. In fact, it'll be easier to go through what we've lost first, and then look at what we've gained. Inner Peace and Drinking Horn Cover, which were our go-to optional nodes, are now no longer taken. Neither is Rising Star. The main reason these talents are no longer taken is because honestly, we just need space for our new Blackout Kick talents. Finally, let's look at optional nodes. You have 5 choices here and you can only take 2. However, one of them has to be a Blackout Kick amplifier to unlock the Sequence Strike talent. So that means at least one of them has to be from the 2 blue in the corner. At the moment, it's hard to tell which combination is going to be the go-to. This is going to require further testing, but I would place my bets on a double Blackout Kick talent buff, or 1 Blackout Kick and then Ordered Element or Thunder Fist. Bear in mind, if we no longer take Ordered Element, this is going to be quite a clear-cut change for Windwalker, as we no longer get the reduced cooldown chi spenders after activating Storm, Earth and Fire, so this might take a bit of time to get used to. So, where does that leave us for single target then? Well, as single target only makes up 2 encounters in the entire season, it's not something to concern over too greatly, as talents will stay relatively the same. I think the main shift will be towards Courageous Impulse as a result of this buff, in replacement for either Inner Peace or Drinking Horn Cover, whichever one you take at the time. However, I'm not entirely sure if Shadowboxing Treads or any of the other mentioned talents will actually be good enough in single target, but I'm willing to be surprised. So, where does this leave Windwalker then? Overall, these buffs are a decent 4 to 5% in single target, and an even better 5 to 6% in AoE. These are significant buffs for the spec, and although they won't be placing us at the top of the DPS food chain, we will be sitting comfortably in the middle, compared to scraping the bottom, which is where we are right now. Shadowpan is still your go-to hero talent for almost all situations. However, if you enjoy Conduit, the gap is only growing smaller. Knock yourself out. Single target is going to stay relatively the same. However, AoE is where things are going to get spicy, and it might be worth practicing on a dummy for a while before heading into your next dungeon on the reset. Anyway, that's all from me with your Windwalker buff news. Hopefully it won't be too long until I get to give you another buff update. Until then, peace.